Welcome back to Press Start to Scream. It is I, Astrid, and I am joined today by the illustrious, wonderful guest, one of the best horror streamers, and incredible horror YouTuber as well. It is SuddenlyAHero. Hello.
Hello. Hello, everyone. That's incredibly kind words. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Truthful words. Yeah.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, I've been very much hoping to get you on the podcast because I always love showing up in your streams and just being like, "Hey, I'm here. It's time to talk about horror things." So
Perfect. Well, now I get to show up on your podcast. I'm here, and we get to talk about horror things.
yes, exactly. It's like I got you here, and now I have locked the door, and I'm just, so here you are. And the only way out is to discuss horror games with me.
If I have to. You forced my hand.
So, one of the most interesting subjects I think that we kind of started to scratch the surface of was whether or not something qualifies as a horror game. This was in a stream that I was doing, and you were hanging out, and someone in the chat suggested that The Last of Us is not a horror game. I believe that you said that you thought that it was. So I have my own opinions, but I want to hear your opinions, specifically for The Last of Us, and then also the wider gaming spectrum in general. What makes The Last of Us a horror game? What makes a video game a horror game?
Yeah. I remember that conversation, and it's a topic that is near and dear to my inky black heart. That term, true horror, always gets under my skin. It really does. And I think in part it does because it tends to be used from, like, I would say, an elitist kind of standpoint sometimes. And it's for me, the way I tend to see it is that it feels like it's gatekeeping horror. And I don't want to do that. I hate that. I hate that idea. Well, for anything, but like, I love horror. I want more people to enjoy it. So when I hear somebody say, "Well, that's not true horror," it's like, let people enjoy things, and it's that's more so to it. But The Last of Us, yeah, I do think it is a horror experience, and I it's hard for me to talk about just The Last of Us without talking about what horror is, without zooming out a little bit first, right? So my thoughts, right, on horror or true horror. So if we're gonna call it true horror, and we kind of have to look at what is horror. What does that mean? And to break it down, I mean, going to the source, going to the definition of the word. It's an intense feeling of fear, shock, or disgust. And I think a lot of times people get hung up on the first part of that, fear. When I typically see people talking about true horror, it's, well, did it scare me? Did was I scared when I played it? But that's only a part of it.
I have often told people my definition of what constitutes something as horror is, was it made with the intention to use fear, grotesque concepts, imagery, shock in order to unnerve the audiences for the purposes of entertainment?
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic definition, because there's that sense of unnerving fear, which, I mean, is more than just, it's more than just being scared, I would say. And yeah, because there are so many different types of horror out there that I feel like a number of people have created this very, very small definition of what it means to be horror. and then just alienated all of the other forms. And really, I think they're missing out.
I think it's interesting how many people will dismiss something as being belonging to the genre because of how they personally felt about it when they watched it. Because how many times have I heard people say, that was a horror game? Well, it didn't scare me. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, it's not the point necessarily. It's the success of its intentions doesn't necessarily relate to what genre it's in.
Mm-hmm.
Was it trying to scare you?
Right.
Is more the key question. The question for me is the primary goal of The Last of Us to scare its audience?
Well, I would also just put out there before we dig into that. I also say that it doesn't necessarily have to be the primary. You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily have to be the primary function. It could fall under a multitude of categories. I mean, there are, certainly things that are horror, but then also other things as well. And I do think that The Last of Us hits on a lot of notes. One being horror in a number of different ways. And we're talking, the body horror of the deformed clickers, or the horrors of a society that has collapsed, and the horrors of people's actions in a lawless world, or the horror of, spoilers, losing a child. I think that there are a multitude of horrors within The Last of Us, but it's also beyond that. It's also an emotional tale. It's about the story of people and love and sacrifice and many other things, But I would say horror is at the cornerstone of it. I think it's a large part of it.
Another
Beyond,
game that you played recently that I think is also hotly debated whether or not it's horror. You went through the Plague Tale games recently.
sure. Yeah,
And you're under the understanding that this is horror as well, yes?
I would absolutely say so. Yeah, Plague was a fantastic series, by the way. Really enjoyed it, and it's frankly not something that I was expecting to enjoy as much as I did. But yeah, beyond the man-eating rats that persist throughout the series, there are so many other instances, and things that similar to The Last of Us. There's a lot of emotional horror. I mean, familial loss and actually the death of people, as well as losing someone to sickness, not being able to help them. Those are things that real fears that people have, and I think you see those all played out. And so it may not be the monster that jumps out of the closet, but it may be the one that is in the bed next to us, right? Something a little more close to home. And I think that is its own type of horror. That's its own type of very relatable fear. And again, with the Plague series, I mean, you look and see how people respond in those situations. I don't want to give too much away about this series, but I know world on the verge of collapse. What people are doing. I mean, the main characters of the game are children, and they're being hunted down, and with aims of being used by an oppressive regime. I mean, that sounds horrible, to me.
Let me play devil's advocate real quick here.
Sure.
Would you then say that a series who deals with a lot of real life scenarios that depict very realistic fears and terrors, such as a very serious cop drama, would also be considered horror, because these are the horrors that take place on the street every day?
Say yes, to your point, if it's intended to do so, if it's intended to show the dark side of the streets, and the real life tragedies and horrors, then I would say yes, in a way. I think I think it is about, I think it's about intention. And if you're attempting to unnerve people, make people feel uncomfortable by the gritty, realistic view of life sometimes, yeah, that's horror in a way. Did you have a show in mind? Were you were you
Oh,
talking about the cops, the
not
actual
not
cop
in
show?
particular, not in particular in
um,
mind, but now that I think of
yeah.
one, there's like The Wire might be a good example.
Hmm.
I also think of a very popular subgenre of fantasy right now is dark fantasy. And dark fantasy very much has so many of its roots in horror.
Hmm.
Berserk, Game of Thrones. There's, I mean, a lot of people have tried to get me into Souls games by saying, there's horror here. And I'm like, I don't doubt you. I do
There
not
is.
doubt you.
There is. Yeah, absolutely. I'm probably one of those people. I'm a big fan of the Souls games, and as being, primarily a horror content creator, I played them. I streamed them because for I think a lot of those where maybe like I said, maybe the main focus isn't horror. It can certainly contain horror elements. And so I think that is, I still think that classifies it as horror, having those intentional elements included. But there may be other things at the forefront. But I think that's the same with any well-crafted piece of entertainment, that it pulls in, multiple genres. Don't get me wrong. I mean, sometimes I like pure a pure straightforward movie, a la, John Wick is an action movie. There's not much else there going on. It's just straight to the point action. I mean, there's barely any dialogue in it. Sometimes that's great too. But I really enjoy a deep piece that pulls in from multiple genres, because it feels realistic. It feels, because that's how life is. It's full of genres and things going on.
Yeah, I think that the main goal of having multiple genres of anything is just so that we can catalog something to better recommend it to someone who may be into something of a similar genre. I think that what frustrates some people when it comes to saying, there's definitely some elitists out there who will definitely say, this isn't horror, how could it be? It didn't scare me, or something.
Hmm.
There's plenty of people who are unsure exactly what to call one game from another, because if you're to tell someone, yes, this is a horror game, and say the only other horror game that they've played is the original Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1, and then they're like, now play The Last of Us. This is also a horror game. There's a lot that has changed between then. Not
Sure.
not just to mention the software, the graphical updates,
Hmm.
but you may come to get an expectation of, okay, so largely this is not going to have any stealth whatsoever. It's going to be maneuvering. It's going to be very carefully understanding my inventory management and knowing that I can only save for as many ink ribbons as I have, and it's at certain save points, etc., etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a world of difference between them. So I think that people sometimes they get like this frustration in them of, look, these games are different. How can they belong to the same genre? And so to that, I usually say they share one genre, but there's other things that make them what they are. And normally I say Resident Evil, we call that old school survival horror. I would not call The Last of Us old school survival horror. And right there, just that 1 degree of separation is enough to differentiate from one horror game to another.
Absolutely.
For instance, you playing, which it's been very exciting to see that, I'm sure for you as well, to be playing the new Dead Space remake.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, if I were to make a suggestion of, hey, you sure do like Dead Space remake, how about playing another horror game I love? It's called Inscription. There's hardly any similarity between the games other than the one that unites them. They're trying to be creepy.
Yeah.
They're
absolutely.
trying to be an unnerving story. And that's what unites them. But you've got a world of things that separates them. And in this day and age of so many different, diverse methods of storytelling and just experiencing entertainment in any medium, there's going to be crossovers. There's going to be influence that comes from one place to another. And I think that instead of trying to further put everything into a very small box, it should be an understanding that there are many large boxes and everything can fit in there while being a box inside of another box. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. I mean, horror is a broad umbrella. There's so many different types and so many things fall under it that I think trying to work so hard at excluding things at that level, I just think it's narrow-sighted. Because yeah, there's with there being so many subgenres, that's where we can start to look, there's the larger horror element, but then look to breaking down, okay, well, what type of horror? And I feel like that's the question that people need to ask more, because it's a huge difference. I mean, yeah, like you were saying, Inscription to Dead Space, both fantastic games. I love both of them so much. But yeah, they are incredibly different. Or looking at things like Little Misfortune, right? Definitely not a game designed to scare you. In fact, it's funny in a lot of it, but I think it has a shock factor. I think there's shock to it. It's uncomfortable in some portions, and then there's just an overall air of creepiness. So that's horror as much as Resident Evil or Silent Hill, Visage, any of those. It's all horror, but what type? And I think that's what people need to ask more often.
So here's a question to you now.
Okay.
If you were to further boil down what type of horror in gaming appeals to you the most, what would you define that as? Because you play a lot of diverse, different horror games. I'm a fan of lots of different diverse horror games myself, but there's definitely some that I prefer to others.
Absolutely. And I do. I try to play. I try to play a ton, and that's by choice, but also as a horror content creator, it's a niche pool. So I'm looking at everything out there to see if it's something that I can create content with. So I try to look at everything. As I do, I've definitely found things that I enjoy more than others. And for me, I think for me, I enjoy an action horror game, something maybe an action survival kind of horror game, the type of experience where I can be scared, but then I have the chance to fight back. That appeals to me because that's kind of my natural inclination, my fight or flight response. I want to respond by being able to attack. That's instead of I don't want to run and hide, or I really enjoy games like Dead Space and Resident Evil. To me, those are the most exciting. I get the most excited by those. But there are a number of games that, of horror games that I've tried, some that I've even streamed, and then stopped. I tried it and it wasn't for me, and I had to stop. And I think it's funny because you bring up the well, it didn't scare me, so it's not horror, because that's something that doesn't really get to me. I mean, I love a game that scares me. Don't get me wrong. If a game scares me and if it elicits that feeling of dread, that's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. But I mean, there are a lot of games that I play that don't scare me, but they don't make it any less horrible. So, what about you? What type of horror games do you like?
Well, in a way, I'm in the same boat. I kind of start to lose immersion from a game if I cannot fight back. It depends though, because I I think that there can be a good mix in a game where combat is simply not the way, and ones where you're expected to kill everything, because I do like those sections in games where they make it clear, okay, you've been able to kill everything so far, but that thing, not that thing. That thing will kill you. Those are some of my favorite moments because it does a great job of telling you, the player, there is something far worse. There is something to fear big time. Just that idea of a dynamic between certain enemies or certain scenarios where fighting isn't the correct thing to do. But I prefer that not be the sole thing in the game. Like, I don't like the run and hide for an entire video game experience, typically. There's exceptions, but typically I don't like that feeling. I mostly want to be able to participate in the game's combat.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're on the same page, along those lines, I think we're both fans of the game Fear.
It's the greatest game of all time. That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, that was one of my first major horror game experiences, and a game that I sing praises about to this day because it does exactly as you described so well, where it mixes those portions of combat, where you're supposed to fight and you can tear through everything, but then you hit those moments where you are absolutely powerless and nothing that you can do is going to save you other than maybe running away. And I think that's great. I think that up and down of emotions is awesome. I love that. That whole dichotomy is awesome. It's great.
I could sing praises about Fear forever because it's the best video game. I really agree when it comes to games that are going to hand you scenarios of very intense action sequences that are exciting but not necessarily scary, but still find time to be like, hey, did you forget this was a horror game? And throw that at you as well. Some of my favorite experiences in horror games were not necessarily the spookiest parts, and they had to do with other aspects of the gameplay that came out of it. I've talked a few times to other folks, and I know that I've said it to you, but this is why I also love Condemned Criminal Origins. Nothing else feels like that game as far as the idea of its combat. It breaks my heart that that game came out and inspired no developers to make games like that, because I'm really extremely happy that we have a Dead Space remake, but also I'm just like, you know what game kind of needs it more? Condemned kind of needs it more.
Why do you think that is? Was it a badly timed release as to why it didn't receive as much love, or why further projects weren't inspired by it?
I feel that the first one did pretty okay, but to be honest, as a huge fan of this game, I say this with love. The ending feels like the definition of what a rushed ending is. It's still disappointing to me that basically the last level of the game feels incredibly out of place and just shoved in there in this sense of like, so the game has to be done now. What do we do? And it's like, oh, well, we were working on the last level because I guess that's the one that we have the most progress in so far, so let's just throw that in now. Like, that's what it feels like. And it did well enough to warrant a sequel, but at that point, people weren't really interested in getting a sequel. And the second thing is that it came out at that time, that glorious time of the Dead Space 3, the Fear 3, the BioShock 2, this idea that how are you going to release a game without having most of the emphasis be on multiplayer? We know that you were supposed to do something else with this game title, but we, the executives who know what the kids like, have decided that this is what your game is going to be now, and that kind of killed it right there. But I think looking back, after Condemned kind of like went out, Fear died, Dead Space died for a little while. Hopefully, fingers crossed that this is a rebirth for Dead Space now.
I think it is.
I'm really hoping that it is, just because I really want franchises besides Resident Evil and Silent Hill to be out there in the limelight and everything. But the game companies that brought horror back were the indie games. Big developers were looking more to what indie games were doing to do horror in the future. And for a long time, we just didn't get big publishers doing horror games at all, period. So the obvious choice for what you're going to do if you want to talk about horror and get people interested in horror, keep knocking out Silent Hill games. You bring back Resident Evil, but this time it's in first person and definitely inspired from PT. You reach back to other developers that are well known in it, which is how we got The Evil Within. You start just trying to carbon copy exactly what indie developers have been doing for damn near a decade. Dead Space should have happened sooner, but it's EA, and they're more known for killing their franchises than reinvigorating them.
Yes.
And for Condemned, it was several problems. One, Sega has moved on, and by moved on, they just want to do Sonic games. That company, Monolith Studios, gets owned by Warner Brothers Interactive. They're not a company that wants to touch, quote, dead franchises with a 10-foot pole. So it's an interesting collaboration of unfortunate events that have led to Condemned kind of being this unique game that could have been a lot more, that just sits there collecting dust for a lot of people. But I will not forget. As long as I am around, I will always remind people Condemned is a game, and I will remind SuddenlyAHero that Martian Gothic was a game that existed one time.
I appreciate the reminder. And I don't think you're alone. You probably are alone about Martian Gothic, but
I refuse. There's people.
There's dozens.
Hero, I watched a Martian Gothic stream like a month ago.
Wow. Very brave
I was
of
there.
them.
2 other people were there.
It was the whole crowd. It was the whole fan base. But I think there's still hope. I would say I think there's hope, because I mean the industry does seem very focused on reviving old franchises, and I think that pool is eventually going to run out. I think we're going to get so close together in the timeline that it won't be as profitable to make a remake of a game that came out a couple of years ago. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that. I mean, we've seen them working on the Resident Evil games, 2 and 3 and 4. And as we get closer to the to the newest releases, it's like, well, you can't continue doing remakes. You don't have any more old games. So what are you going to do? Well, maybe we'll create new games, but maybe we can dig in and find some hidden gems. Some of these games that had great potential but didn't necessarily take off. And if I was a business person, I would look at that. That's something I would be looking into because that's untapped potential. So there's hope.
I hope so.
I would say there's hope.
I played a game not too long ago that I had never heard of. I've never heard people talking about it. I discovered it as part of some YouTubers who are going through some old DOS material and came across this 90s FMV horror game called Realms of the Haunting. I thought it was a masterpiece. I played
Really?
through the whole thing and still kind of when I think back on it, I'm like, wow, that game was good. That was kind of incredible, and I've never played anything quite like that game. I know that when it came out, it didn't do very well. And I know just from being a person who's in horror game circles, I never hear people talking about it. It's things like this that I try to bring to others' attention. I know that me and you have a laugh about our own inside joke about Martian Gothic unification being a video game, but on the real, and I've said this to you before, like Martian Gothic is a game that could have been really good, but just kind of wasn't. Really
Yeah.
cool ideas, really cool concepts. I think that what makes Realms of the Haunting so unique is it was trying to merge the idea of a first-person shooter, an FMV game, a puzzle game, and a point-and-click adventure all into one. And
Wow.
the problem that game ran into is all of those genres, people were fans of one or the other.
Sure.
Not a
Sure.
lot of first-person shooter fans, just like first-person and a puzzle game, I'm in. Like, and people who are fans of point-and-click adventure kind of games are like, fast-paced action? I didn't really sign up for that. So
Mhm.
throw in horror, which is by itself fairly abrasive to a lot of people, and you have a game that was kind of destined to not do well. But God, it was so cool. I lean in with that. I start with that to ask you, who have said that you're working on showcasing a bunch of games that people may not have heard of. Is there something like that for you where people aren't talking about this, or you'd like people to talk about it, or you just like to draw attention to it because it's interesting?
So I just want to start out by saying I love this. For me, one of my favorite things about being in this niche community, I guess, is that it really does feel like a community, and we're able to share things that, I mean, we're able to share the big releases and stuff that come out. Everybody kind of knows of those, or they're the blockbusters, but we get to also share like these like little hidden gems. And it's just fun. It's so fun to be able to kind of put someone on to a horror game or movie or whatever it may be that they may not have heard of, but is actually really good. And so that's always really exciting. That's one thing that I love. I'm trying to think related to horror games if there's something that people might not have heard of but would probably really enjoy. I'm not entirely sure. To maybe take a step back and talk about horror in general, something that's just on my mind because I stumbled across something about it today, is related to like horror shows. And so I managed to find a link to a YouTube channel that showed the latest season of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared.
Ah.
Um, and have you watched the YouTube series at all?
I watched like I don't know if there's any more, but I think I watched the first 4.
It's not very long. Yeah, I think there's like 4 to 6 episodes in the original YouTube series. And then they actually ended up getting picked up by a British television network. I think it was Sky One, maybe, and they released a season on TV. But it was unavailable. It was unavailable unless you were in the UK. But someone posted a link, and I managed to check it out on YouTube, which has been awesome. But I really enjoyed Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. It is just warning for anybody who does decide to watch it. It is very uncomfortable at times. I wouldn't say it's scary, but I would say it's incredibly unnerving and certainly disgusting in moments. But I enjoy it. I mean, I enjoyed it so much that I ended up watching like 2 hour long like breakdown of the series and like what does this mean? like trying to dig into all the corners and stuff of the show. So I would recommend that people check that out. I think for people looking for it's I mean it's like it's like a disturbing Sesame Street if I had to explain it in any way. It's well done. It's very well done. It's an interesting concept. And then it's smart. It's a very smart show. There's so much going on behind the scenes, and if you really dig into like all the little Easter eggs and stuff, it's a smart show. And I've mentioned to a few people before when they were looking for some horror thing to watch, and I've mentioned it a few times. And a lot of times I've gotten the recommendation or the response that they had no idea what that was. And so it's something that I tend to share that I enjoy, which I'm cautious saying because people are going to watch it and then be like, what is wrong with Hero?
This is the road that we chose to walk down, Hero. We're going to suggest things to people that they'll look at us weird for it, you know?
Yeah, that's my life. Yep, absolutely. I've walked down this path my entire life practically. Like I was introduced to horror at a young age. Don't tell on my parents, but I think my mom was renting like 80s slasher movies when I was like 4 years old, and we would sit down and watch them like on a Friday night. So I've been into it for a long time. I love it. It's just a part of my life. And
I can't believe you said that on a podcast for the internet to hear.
It's gonna be out there forever. They're all gonna know.
Yeah.
They're gonna know how weird I am. But that's okay. It's okay because I feel like I've found my people, so it's fine.
That is important, yes.
But yeah, it's as far as games, I'm not entirely sure. I am trying though. I am trying to share at least upcoming horror games on my YouTube channel that people might not have heard of. And so I'm just starting that journey of trying to look for things that look interesting, that look good. The game isn't fully released, so I don't know how the game's gonna actually be in the end. But I'm looking for games that have demos available, and I play through it. And if it seems interesting, I'm kind of sharing a brief overview of it and giving my first impressions on it. And that's been really fun. That's something that I've really enjoyed doing lately.
So on the subject of what you are looking forward to, that and also the subject of what you're looking forward to seeing in horror games and what you want from horror games, what don't you want? What are the things that you see in horror games that you're like, it has this. I think I'll pass on that one.
Well, and again, I mean, that's subjective in a lot of cases. So as far as like things that I don't want to see in development, I feel like I don't have probably as many of those because I think there are tastes out there for everyone. So to each their own. There are a bunch of things that I don't like personally, or that that I wouldn't play. in games.
That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
I want the
Okay.
hero opinion.
My opinion. It's tough because, like I said, I like some action horror. I like action horror. I like explorative horror, to be able to move around and investigate things. If I can't fight it, I want to at least just be able to look around and experience it. Very
Mm-hmm.
like haunted house esque.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I love those types of experiences. And I think in some of those, or in well, in a number of horror games, those come with some jump scares. And I think jump scares are something that can be done really well. I think that a jump scare is the exclamation point. It should capitalize on everything that's come before it. I do think that there are a number of games and movies out there that overly rely on those without offering much else. It's the cotton candy fluff of horror, and it can be great, but it's not filling. There's nothing else. There's no substance to it, and to me, I hate that. I want a full experience. Um, and so for me, the reliance on jump scares as the kind of the primary horror element, that's something I'd like to see less of.
Does
What
anything come to mind immediately? Any game that you're like this one? This one had an over reliance.
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think. My mind is going blank. At the moment. But yeah, it's just something that I feel like I notice more so when I'm in it, or at least I notice more so when games don't do that as much. When they get that beautiful feeling of dread that they set up through the atmosphere of the game, and then they capitalize with a jump scare after all of that. To me, it's refreshing. It feels good. It feels like they've done their due diligence. They've put in the work and really created a intense and terrifying situation versus something that's just surprising. Because for me, that it doesn't. I feel like it just doesn't take as much effort. It's cheap. It's. I mean, you can surprise anyone with a very quiet sound and then a loud noise and something in your face. I mean, that's you could do that constantly, but I don't think that's good horror.
Would you say that you prefer the horror to be more lasting?
I I would say so. I would say, I mean, in a lot of senses, yes. I like the build up. I like when a scene is set and things are in motion and they slowly build to that point, and then something terrifying happens. Or even in some cases, there doesn't have to be a big moment. There doesn't have to be a jump scare to capitalize on it. I mean, just that feeling of dread is something that is pretty awesome, and I think it takes a lot more work to set up something like that. And so yeah, so something that's longer lasting. I mean, I also love an experience that sits with you and lasts long after the scare has happened.
Mm.
And I feel like that happens a lot more with scares that aren't just a jump scare, but something that sets a tone, and gives you that feeling that just sits with you long after the game or the movie is finished. That to me, oh, that's good. That's good horror.
What's the last thing to do that to you in gaming?
The best one that sits with me, or the one that I can recall recently that has sat with me the most was probably Visage.
Oh,
Um,
Visage.
yeah, yeah, that was one that I really enjoyed. I mean, there were parts about the game that absolutely frustrated me,
Sure.
and that I that I hated. But overall, I love the game because it gave me a feeling of dread, a feeling that you were never safe. I mean, in part due to their whole pause mechanic that they have, but it's something that just lasted with me. And some of the scares in that were in your face, and some of them were very, very settled. Maybe somebody poking their head around the corner and then like sliding back slowly, just for a moment, and that is terrifying. I mean, it sent shivers up my spine a few times, so I loved it. I really loved that game. In fact, I had nightmares. I had nightmares
Ooh.
the first two times that I streamed it, which I thought was pretty great because it doesn't. I don't really watch or play things and then get nightmares afterwards. But that one did. It was the Dolores chapter for me.
Hmm.
So that was something that I think uh, did that very well. What about yourself? Any game that comes to mind with that feeling of dread?
A big one that comes to mind immediately is Soma,
Mm.
because I wasn't prepared for the mixture of transhumanist theory and existential horror. I love transhumanist theory, but
Hmm.
God, existential shit gets to me.
I have thoughts about Soma.
Oh, I know you do.
Okay, good. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure I've said them, but yeah, yeah. But I get it. I get it though.
I've been playing through a lot of Secret World recently. There's been a few times the narrative in Secret World has really, really, like, gotten to my head and just would not leave. And I'm like, I
Mm.
have to wait till next Sunday, because I play it every Sunday, to
Hmm.
see more of this. Like, it's an interesting moment in the game where they really build up to certain parts. They talk about this location, and over again they refer to it. You finally get there and it's so much worse than what you thought, and they've been building it up for a while.
Yeah.
Without talking about too many different times this has happened, because it's happened a lot in that game, they constantly talk about, like, Tokyo,
Hmm.
and they'll refer to something like, hey, we don't want another Tokyo on our hands, and, well,
Sure.
you know how things went down in Tokyo. And this whole time you're like, you say that, I have no idea what went down in Tokyo. I don't.
Yeah.
And then eventually they're building up to, all right, we're going to send you to Tokyo.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay. And you get there and it's immediately horrifying. And
Wow.
I was like really anticipating. I was going in with high
Hmm.
expectations and they were just met. And more so than that, it gave me something I didn't think I'd be thinking about. When you first start the game, there's a tutorial, and the tutorial, they tell you, is an event that happened in Tokyo at one time, and it's really ambiguous and everything, but
Sure.
you do that, you experience that part of the tutorial, and they tell you, yeah, that was a real event. We have this machine that lets you experience real events, and you're just kind of, okay, sure,
Yeah.
I'll,
Okay.
I'll do that. You get to Tokyo, and the first thing you see is this person who's quoting parts of the tutorial and in their voice, and they are scarred by this event that happened in the tutorial that you played, and you realize that they're plugging into their mind and making
Wow.
them relive their nightmare over and over and over again,
Oh my God.
endlessly, every single time a new recruit gets added to your your company, basically. And that really fucked me up for a while.
That's amazing. I think that's so well done. I haven't even played it, and I'm in awe of that. I think that's such a great idea. So yeah, kudos to whoever's idea that was from the developers. That's awesome. I mean, it's just so cool. Just the amount of like the setup for that. It's art. I think that's art, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, that was such a cool moment, and that was just my intro to Tokyo.
Yeah.
But yeah, God, I really appreciate what they did there. That's probably the most recent thing that really stayed with me for a while after playing it.
You're selling me on Secret World. Okay. I don't know if
Everything
that
is
was
going exactly as I had foreseen.
You're not even recording, are you? This is it's just so you can get me to play Secret World.
What do you mean? Of course I'm recording. That's when you just hear a click and it's like, yes, suddenly a hero is here.
Oh hey everyone. Oh man, DMs me like a referral code for Secret World.
It's free. I'm just throwing that out there.
I would expect no less. I would expect no less from you. Uh,
Before we wrap things up here, I'm curious once again to revisit, is there something that you think that more people should play? Just in general, more people should play. 'Cause it's a game that you really love and it's spooky, scary, and worth talking about.
I'm running through like my Rolodex,
Yeah.
my Rolodex of horror, like
Mm-hmm.
starting early, early on.
Well, I have one on my
Um,
desk too.
oh yeah, we all do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All horror content creators, they have a little Rolodex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking back, I'm thinking, early on, some of the stuff that I played that scared me. Like Fatal Frame
Mm-hmm.
was one of those back in the PS2 era.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't kept up with this series, and I know it's gone a bunch of different directions. There are some non-US releases also that happened, but I think we're getting a new Fatal Frame here pretty shortly.
It's actually the fourth one. The fifth one is Made into the Blackwater. The fourth one was never released to US. It's coming out next month.
There you go.
Oh,
There you go.
I'm so excited.
I've played the first two of those, and that was a fantastic game and such a wonderful experience when I was younger, which was terrifying for me to play at the time. And I haven't revisited it. I haven't revisited it in a long time, so maybe I'll have to. So that, and then of that kind of same time frame is when I played Fear, which you and I both stand on the same page with.
Greatest game of all time, yes.
Okay, it's for me it's not the greatest game of all time, but I will say that it is a fantastic horror game that really does that change of emotion very well, from feeling powerful to helpless, and the fears that come with it. Such a great game. Trying to think about what I've played recently. Obviously, Dead Space. Everybody knows Dead Space now, and I'm very happy that a lot more people are probably playing Dead Space now uh, than have ever played it,
Mm-hmm.
with the remake, which I think is super exciting. And one of the cool parts about remakes, the ability to introduce a new audience to a game that many of us have enjoyed, but many also haven't, or they're of a newer generation and just haven't been exposed to it yet. So I think that's really cool. One game that I would say that I would share that is, I would say, dated at this point, to be sure, but Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I'll say that's my answer. I'm gonna go with Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and I have such a history with that game.
I did
Um,
not know this. Now you have to tell me your favorite clan.
yeah. So no, Vampire the Masquerade, such a cool game, and something that I stumbled onto. I used to get video game magazines, and for the younger audience, it's
Mm-hmm.
like these little thin books that you would get in the mail. Um, so I had one for PC Gamer, and it had a whole like front page article about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. So I read through it. I was completely enamored with the idea, and then eventually got the game, only to find out that my computer at the time could not handle it. And it was then many years before I actually had a computer that could handle it, and I played through it, loved it. It combines so many amazing elements. I mean, I'm a big sucker for RPGs. Sucker, no pun intended. But a huge fan of RPGs. And to be able to get lost in that dark underworld, is it's amazing. And I think it's actually my very first Steam review that I ever gave. But yeah, it was just such a cool experience to be able to you know become a creature of the night and live in that dark underworld. Again, at this point, probably very dated, which is why I was excited for Bloodlines 2 that was supposed to come out, but that's its own story.
That's a
you know,
whole can of worms. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I'm still holding out hope for that because I'd love for more people to check out the series. But it's a good one. It's a good one. Definitely check it out. It's probably cheap if you're looking to pick it up on Steam, I would
You will
imagine.
need a mod to be able to play it at all.
Really, I didn't even
Yeah.
I didn't even I didn't even know that.
It's not
Um,
hard to find, but yeah, you need a mod to be able to play it at all now.
Interesting. Yeah. See, that's how long it's been since I played it. But I think you asked my clan. Um,
Yes.
so when I played it, when I first started playing it, I think I picked the Tremere clan because
Okay.
of the blood magic, because I just thought it was cool to have magic. But I would say if I was gonna play through it now, I would say the Toreadors. Um,
Okay.
I love their embodiment.
It's because you love pretty people and you love being beautiful.
I love pretty people and pretty things and the beauty of the world and just enjoying that. So that's what they're all about. And so hands down. I mean, if there are any Toreador vampires out there, you are welcome in. That's all. That's this
For
is
the
an
record.
open invitation. What about you? Just because I know this is the commonality. Well, what about you?
I'm still in Clan Bruges because I'm an anarch all the way through.
I mean, fair enough. I will say that I was very much behind the anarchist cause
Yeah,
when I played
baby.
that game. So they were definitely like the coolest clan. So I liked it. I liked it.
Well, Hero, thank you for joining me for Press Start to Scream, this little podcast that I've got. I appreciate you coming on in.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast. I always love getting the chance to talk with you and talking about horror especially. So thank you.
Of course, before we go, shout yourself out. Where can we find you? What content do you do?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me everywhere as Suddenly a Hero. I'm on all platforms. I primarily stream on Twitch as well as create videos on YouTube. I stream horror games on Twitch, have a very chill, cozy kind of vibe. It's a strange combination, but oddly enough, it works. And on my YouTube channel, I'm previewing upcoming indie horror games. So some games that aren't quite released yet or are brand new releases that you might not have heard of that you might want to check out.
All right. Thank you very much, Hero.
Thank you.
And to everyone out there, thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.